Hello everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty and welcome to the Gingerbread Mania. Tonight I'm going to be showing you how I created that little cutie up there on the shelf using some decorative painting techniques and adding a little mixed media elements just to add that little special little sparkle to this gingerbread man. Today I'm a part of a YouTube collaboration with the Can't Sleep Creations. We have three hosts today. We have Dawn at Shabby Meets Bling, Jody at Southern Seasons, and Monica at Up All Night DIY. You're going to find the links to their channels down inside of the description box, as well as the playlist for all of the other creators who are joining in today's Gingerbread Mania. Well, let's get started. I'm excited to show you how I created this sweet little guy up on the shelf. I found the wood pieces at Walmart and I cut one circle in half to create the two gingerbread hands. I gave the wood pieces a coat of the multi-purpose sealer. It just helps seal the wood and allows the paint to glide across your surface so much easier. The color Cocoa and the Deco Art color is what I used to base coat my half circle in first. Then to start the shading process, I loaded my brush with Cocoa and added just a little bit of the light cinnamon color on the edges to create the shadowing around the edge of my gingerbread head and my hands. Once I had the edging done, I took a little bit more of that paint and double loaded my brush again and created more depth and shadows on the gingerbread man. By doing this, it just creates a more interesting surface than just being a solid color. I base coated the eyes in lamp black and the frosting in the cheeks and the noses all in a warm white. Once I had them base coated, I went ahead and started with the nose and the cheeks first. I was going to be using the color Primary Red. Reds are often very see-through, so you want to have a brighter color underneath. It just helps brighten up your reds if you do it this way. Once I had the Primary Red on while it was still wet, I chose the color Deep Burgundy and double mixed my colors just to add another extra layer of glow to my red. The next shading techniques, I'm going to be using the colors Burnt Umber and Light Cinnamon. I'm going to be doing some water floating techniques. I take an angle brush and I dip it into my water, and then I dip the toe of my brush into my paint and give it a light brushing off to the side. This is going to blend that paint from the tip of my brush, the toe, to the heel of my brush across. And this is going to give it a nice watercolor float from dark to light. You can see the little bit of extra water I'm having. I have a nice floated color. It's okay to have a little bit of extra water during this step. It's going to give you a nice floated look. By adding this darker brown to the outside, it just gives my gingerbread even a little bit more depth to the edges. I also do that floating technique around the inside of the frosting and the outside of the frosting. When doing this look, I want to make sure I'm using enough water so I'm not getting hard edges while doing this. I'm looking for a nice floated water look in the end. I'm going to switch the colors to Light Cinnamon now, and I'm going to be adding just a light float underneath my nose. I'm going to again be putting that little bit of color on the toe of my brush and then blending that underneath my red areas. So underneath my nose, underneath my mouth, and then the sides of a shadow for the edges of the hearts. Just choose a side. I'm going to choose that the top will be the light side of my hearts and the bottom will be the dark. The next area I'm going to work on is the eyes, and I'm going to be using Spa Blue to be able to do the floated color on the eye. I load my brush the same way I had done the other floats. I turn my piece upside down because it's easier for me to pull that color towards me than it is the other opposite direction. So I start at the bottom and then pull my color to the top. Each of these floats are going to be on the right side of each eye. The color looks rather bright right away, but it's a whiter color, so that means it's going to flatten out as it dries. You gotta trust the process on this one. It looks bright, but it's going to flatten out. To bump up the color of the red, I choose the color Heritage Brick, and I just go ahead and brush a little bit of that on the dark side or the shadow area of my reds. So on the bottom of my hearts and a little bit on my nose just adds even that little next layer of interest to those red areas. Once my color's dried a little bit more on my eyes, you can always lay in another color, another layer of the float. I needed to brighten it a little bit on the one side, just to even my eyes out. Now to create an additional sparkle to those eyes, I take a round brush, water down my paint just a slight bit, go ahead and twist and turn my brush, and then paint a comma on each side of the blue floated area. I'm using the color Snow White to create this little bit of highlight. Once I have the comma strokes done, I take a stylus and I create a dip, dot, little starlight in his eye. If I do it on the inside of the one eye, I have to do it on the outside of the other. I went ahead and put just a double dots at the bottom of the eyes just to add even a little bit more sparkle to bring that little black area to life. Once my dots are all dry, I can go ahead and add the float to the eye. I'm using the color Light Cinnamon to be able to create this float. I'm using a small angle brush just like I had done with my other colors and create that float on the one side of my eye, on the outside. And then I go ahead and do the bottom area as well. You just want to lightly load your brush for this look. The bottom area needs to be a little bit lighter of a float. If it's too dark at the bottom of the eyes, they look a little tired, like they've got dark circles underneath their eyes. So go lighter on the bottom and heavier on the edges. I go to the bottom, do that light float, and then on the inside I go about halfway up with that floated color. This is just going to help those eyes look like they're set back into the head and not just painted directly on top. It really does add a lot of depth to your little characters. I went ahead and popped a few little eyebrows in. I'm using that small brush again, using some lamp black color, really watered down. You want to have a lot of water in these little areas that you're doing the fine line on. You want to use an even pressure. It's better to go ahead and reload your brush than it is to try to push down harder to get more of a line. If you have even pressure, your line work will be a lot more even. Once your line work is dry, go ahead and pop another float of the light cinnamon underneath the eyebrow, and do that as well underneath your smile and the little mouth area. Again, this is really going to help create that sense of depth and make it look like your items are a part of your face and not just painted flatly on your piece. It's worth the extra time to add that little bit of shading. You'll really notice the difference. I went ahead and checked my little frosting areas again to see if I needed to darken my shadows before I went on to the next step. I was going to be adding the blushing onto the cheeks. I like to do a dry brush technique. I use a soft brush. I've had it for a long time. It's a nylon bristle brush. I like to go ahead and dip my color into whatever cheek color I'm using. I'm using deep burgundy for this. I like to go ahead and scrub it on my paper, give it a little brush on a paper towel, but the final step is I always put it in my hand, and if it feels dry when I'm brushing it on my hand, then I know it's dry enough to put on my piece of paper. I'm doing a double blushing of color here. I started with the deep burgundy, and then I'm adding kind of a peachy pink on top called cactus flower. I like doing the double loading of the color of the cheeks. Again, it's all about the layers, and adding just that little extra bit of pink really does change the look of these cheeks. To create the highlights for my nose, my cheeks, and my mouth, I'm using the color Snow White. I'm going to be using a stylus to create the pattern in a technique called dip, dot, drag. I'm going to be dipping my stylus into my paint, making a dot, and then dragging that dot down. It will make the perfect little size of comma for these small areas. Each time you dot your stylus, your dots become smaller, so I usually use anywhere between 2 to 3 dots in these small areas. So on my nose, I'm going to be dipping my paint, making a dot, and then going ahead and sliding that little stylus across, making the little comma, then adding a few more dots to the top, and I add a few more dots to the bottom. Adding this little dip, dot, dash patterns really do add a little bit of whimsical to these characters. The next step I do is I take a filbert brush, which is a brush that has a nice little rounded tip at the end, and I take a little bit of my bright color, the Snow White, and I add that to the little frosting area. I'm not trying to cover up all the other colors that are underneath there. I'm just adding this little bit of twinkle brightness on the very top. I've done all this work on my face, but I've also been working on my hands as well. I've been adding the shading to the tops of the hands and the underneath of the frosting bits as well, making sure that that's going to blend in evenly when I put it on its face. They kind of definitely look like little cookies at this stage. Now to add a little bit of unexpected color, I'm going to take the color Bahama Blue, and I'm going to use that filbert brush, and I'm going to go ahead and load my brush with some of the Snow White paint, take a little bit of that Bahama Blue, a little bit on the edge, and I'm going to be able to wipe that blue across in that little bit of the frosting area. This is going to add just a little bit of unexpected color, a little bit of frostiness, a little bit of coolness to the color, but this color looks beautiful with these browns, and it's a nice little surprise to see this bit of blue. I'm going to be just softening my color as I go, making sure that it's not too bright of a blue, but you can still see it. So I'm using that filbert brush and brushing that color throughout. It's just a nice way to add a little bit of sparkle and unexpected color. You can see as I'm going, I'm adding a little bit more of that white and softening the blue, but you can still see that blue. This gingerbread character already looks great with all the different painting techniques I've applied on the top, but I want to go ahead and add just a little bit of some mixed media line work to this little character to even boost up that whimsical look to him. I'm going to start by using the Kimberly 9XXB pencil. It's a super soft graphite pencil. It adds beautiful line work to the pieces. I like using it loosely in my hand, creating little sketch marks, going past what I've painted to even loosen up the line work. I like using this pencil to add the little wispy eyelashes off to the side and little tiny little eyelashes at the top, just adding even a little bit more whimsical character to these eyes. It really does add that little extra depth to these eyes. I also use this little line work around the frosting area. I hold it loosely in my hand, draw lightly, twisting my pencil and loosening up my line work. It adds that little extra bit of interest to that little frosting area. I also use a pencil around the nose to create a little bit more interest around the nose, and I also use it around the heart areas too. I'm trying not to trace exactly around what I painted already. I want to loosen up that line work, so I'm going past the items that I've already painted. Now to add a little bit of white line work. I'm going to be using the Sharpie China marker for this. It has rather a crayon quality to it. It creates that crayon look. It's a very soft white. It's not as harsh as using some other ink whites. This has more of a softer quality line. I'm using it in my hand and I'm twisting and I'm turning it. I'm holding it loose to be able to create this lacy little bit of look to this little character. I like adding that little bit of look where it's not so tight to everything I just drew. You can see how my line work is very loose. I'm not following exact, and it really does open that area up and create just another look of whimsy to this little character. Then I go back in and I kind of established another little bit of a pattern with this little marker. I'm putting little dots on there. It kind of reminds me of lace in a way, and I love that look of having that little bit of lightness to this character. I use it also to add a little bit of highlight to my nose and to my cheeks. Now to add a little bit of color to my eyes, I'm going to be using the Stabilo Woody Pencil in a shade of blue. These also work a little bit like crayons. They are water soluble, so you can go ahead and draw on your area and then take a paintbrush and then soften that color and that line work. So here I'm going on my frosting. It's just going to be another shade of blue. And then I come in with a paintbrush and I just soften that color back. It's another way to add a little bit of color without adding another layer of paint. It kind of looks like watercolor is what it reminds me of, but it's in a pencil form. I continued the pattern onto the hands as well, added a few more lines with my pencil, just making sure my lines were nice and loose. I'm hoping that you can really see what a difference it makes by adding this little bit of pattern using these mixed media pencils. It really does add to the life of the eyes by adding those dark qualities, and the fine lines really does make the whimsical nature of this gingerbread man come to life. I add a final layer of dry brushing of white to the tops of my cheeks and to the front of my hands. I'd like to go ahead and say a special thank you to Dawn, Jody, and Monica for hosting today's Gingerbread Mania. Definitely check out the links to their channels inside of the description box, as well as click that playlist to watch all the other creators. I'm sure you're going to be inspired to create something fun and festive for your home. I wanted to add a little bit of glitter detail to this gingerbread, and my favorite product to use is called Stickles, and I love the color diamond. It has a precision tip so you can add your glitter just where you want it, and it's suspended in glue, so it's only going to go where you want it to go. It's my kind of glitter. Well, let's see what this cutie looks like sitting on a shelf. If you're new to my channel and you like to do art and crafts, come on over and see what I do. On Tuesdays, I do draw-alongs and art tutorials. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Leave me a comment if you've been inspired to try a little mixed media on your next acrylic painting. Well, thanks for hanging out with me, and hopefully you'll come back and see me again. And next time, you'll create right along with me.